Hearing will come to order. Good morning and welcome to each of you. Thanks very much for being here. 5 years ago this month, the President signed into law the eGovernment Act of 2002, a bill that I was privileged to co-sponsor with two former colleagues, or one former colleague, primarily Senator Conrad Burns, and the other colleague, who some of you still may be hearing about, Senator Fred Thompson, was involved in parts of the proposal. And the aim was to bring the federal government into the Internet age so that we could better serve the public. The goal of the bill, as we said at the time, was to exchange the cumbersome, static, often bewildering process for citizens to get information and conduct transactions with government agencies for a, and I quote, dynamic, interactive, and user-friendly government, end quote. Today, we're going to ask how close the government has come in the ensuing 5 years to achieving that goal. As I see it, in sum, much has been achieved over the past 5 years, but there certainly is a lot more that we can and must do. That's why Senators Collins, Carper, and I introduced legislation to reauthorize the eGovernment Act, the number is S2321, for an additional 5 years, and also to add some strength to it. 1 month ago, this committee favorably reported the bill, and I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to move it through the Senate soon. Our first witness today, Karen Evans, is the administrator of the Office of eGovernment and Information Technology at the Office of Management and Budget, a position that was created in the original eGovernment Act. Her testimony will provide an overview of what we've been able to achieve since passage of the Act, what challenges have arisen, and what the future goals are for eGovernment. We're also going to examine an important issue addressed by our reauthorization bill, which is that the public frequently cannot find information and services placed on government websites. It's a pretty basic problem. And the source of it is that information and services on many government sites, through practice or policy, are simply inaccessible to commercial search engines such as Google. Our bill aims to remedy this by requiring regular review, reporting, and testing across the federal government of accessibility to search capabilities. Two of our witnesses today, John Needham from Google and Ari Schwartz from the Center for Democracy and Technology, will, I hope and believe, discuss this problem, why it exists, and what relatively simple steps can be taken to overcome it and vastly expand the ease of citizen access to federal government information. In this regard, our reauthorization bill may already have had an impact, of course, in the normal processes of Washington. We will immediately take credit for this, whether it did or not. But last week, the Office of Personnel Management announced it would make available to commercial search engines for the first time the listing of the 60,000 job vacancies that now exist in the federal government. That's significant, and it will have, we think, an immeasurable effect on the ability of people seeking employment in the federal government to use the Internet to find and apply for such positions. And it shows, I think, how easily we can dramatically expand access to possibilities and information in the federal government. Today, we'll also examine how new collaborative technologies can strengthen interaction among government agencies and the public. We're very glad to have as a witness Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, one of the most thrilling examples of what collaborative technology can produce. And we've asked Mr. Wales to take us through some of the ideas behind Wikipedia and then to relate them to our jurisdiction, which is to say, to help us understand how similar technologies and collaborative activities can be applied to government for greater information sharing and communication, both within the government, but also between the government and the public. In fact, quite encouragingly, as you know, the intelligence community has already developed and is using something that they call a collaborative technology that they call Intellipedia, which is based directly on the Wikipedia model. So this is if imitation is a form of flattery, you should feel flattered. And the aim of this is to foster collaboration and information across the intelligence community. Obviously, this is on a closed site. While our focus today is on the executive branch, I think it's also important to acknowledge that we in the legislative branch have a lot more that we can do better in this regard as well. In this spirit, Senators McCain and Collins and I are today introducing legislation that will require the Congressional Research Service to make its extremely valuable taxpayer-funded reports more easily accessible to the taxpayers. No method currently exists for the public to access these reports quickly and easily, though those who can afford to pay can now access them through private companies who gather them. Our bill would allow members and committees to easily post all CRS reports on their website so they're more readily available to anyone with access to the Internet. The legislative branch can also do a much better job of presenting information to the public about the status of bills and resolutions before Congress. We in Congress have access to a comprehensive website run by the Library of Congress, but the public site, known as Thomas, is far less advanced. Furthermore, Senate votes, unlike House votes, are intentionally presented in a format that limits the public's ability to examine senators' records, which is tempting, but not in the public interest. It's a bit silly too, because I can tell you that in Connecticut, every Sunday, in at least two of the major newspapers, they print the votes of the Connecticut delegation in the preceding week. I intend to work with my colleagues in the Library of Congress to eliminate these blocks to transparency and accountability. So these issues are essential, I think, to the future of an effective and responsive government. These really quite miraculous technologies, which I find my children's generation are taking for granted, still amaze me, and they enable us to do things that quite recently we were unable to do. Just as the private sector has harnessed these new technologies to fuel its growth in an information-based economy, we in government have a responsibility to keep pace with the skill set of that up-and-coming workforce, as well as with the underlying new technologies to meet our responsibility to the public. So I look forward very much to this discussion today. Our first witness, and we'll go right to you, is Karen Evans, Administrator of the Office of Electronic Government and Information Technology at OMB. Good morning. Thanks for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Chairman. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the current status of e-government, the potential for collaborative technologies, and any remaining potential challenges for the future of e-government services. As you stated, this December 17th marks 5 years since the President signed the e-Government Act of 2002 into law. The passing of this act was an acknowledgment of the rapid transformation the Internet and information technology has on the way citizens, private business, and government interacts with one another. Currently, our efforts such as the Federal Enterprise Architecture and the government lines of business are used to enhance collaboration among federal agencies by aligning their business processes at a strategic level, which makes it easier for them to partner and work with one another. It's the challenge of getting these processes institutionalized, which is one of the difficulties in getting agencies to collaborate and share information better, and is also one of the remaining challenges for e-government when looking ahead and attempting to transform services and get results. By addressing what has been accomplished over the last 5 years, I wanted to briefly update the committee on the latest security and privacy metrics across the federal government. Title III of the eGovernment Act, otherwise known as the Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA, called for a comprehensive framework for ensuring the effectiveness of information security controls over information resources supporting federal operations and assets. Our latest FISMA fiscal year 2007 fourth quarter report continues to show 88% of all major IT systems across the federal government have been certified and accredited, while 19 out of the 25 major agencies have privacy impact assessments for 90% or more of the applicable systems. Overall, we consider FISMA to be successful in helping to meet the goal of improved information security across federal IT systems, and we will continue to work with agencies to increase security and privacy effectiveness while at the same time managing risks to an acceptable level. We will be providing our annual FISMA report to Congress on March 1st of 2008. Overall, good progress has been made toward achieving the core goals of the eGovernment Act, namely to increase access to government information and services and to provide enhanced opportunities for increased citizen participation in government. Some notable examples of this are the federal internet portal is up and running at usa.gov. People can easily participate in federal rulemaking process through regulations.gov, and the process of doing privacy impact assessments has helped to protect the personally identifiable information in the care of the government. Compared to 2002, there are now easy-to-use online government services that the public can access. More importantly, though, people are using and embracing these services. USA.gov achieved an incredible 97 million visits during fiscal year 2007, or 1.87 million visits per week. This last year, USA.gov also received numerous national recognitions for the quality and the effectiveness in providing government information to the public, and was highlighted in July of 2007 by Time magazine in an article entitled 25 Sites We Can't Live Without. USA.gov now features multiple channels to allow citizens to contact them with questions about federal government information and services through the National Contact Center and through the new online live assistance chat features. Gov Benefits, led by the Department of Labor, empowers people to make decisions for themselves and their families by providing a single website to access information on more than 1,000 government benefit and assistance programs. Gov Benefits significantly reduces the amount of time individuals spend trying to identify and access relevant information about government benefit programs. By answering a few specific questions, individuals are better able to determine which government benefits they may be eligible to receive, along with a description and contact information for each program. To date, Gov Benefits is receiving approximately 250,000 visits per month by citizens and has provided nearly 5.5 million citizen referrals to benefit programs. State and local governments have also benefited from our efforts. The eGovernment Act provides for state and local governments the opportunity to use the GSA federal supply schedules for automated data processing equipment, software, supplies, support equipment, and services as included in their Schedule 70. GSA issued its final rule authorizing the acquisition of IT by state and local governments on May 18, 2004. Recently, under the Smart Buy initiative, which is software managed and acquired on the right terms, that leverages the entire federal government's buying power. We awarded contracts for the latest security encryption products and services at discounted prices. This was the first time a Smart Buy agreement was extended to state and local governments, allowing them to leverage their purchasing power alongside the federal government and allowing them to purchase the same products comparable to what the federal government has. When looking ahead, we see many of the presidential e-government initiatives as foundational services, positioning the government to be more collaborative, transparent, and accountable through the use of information technology. Initiatives such as regulation.gov provide an environment to allow for a collaborative approach, truly fostering e-democracy, which brings citizen participation in government back to a more personal level. In fact, the purpose of many of the initiatives is to provide a more citizen-centered approach toward the delivery of government services, so the people themselves are not just recipients, but also active participants in how these services are delivered. Helping to further the goal of a more citizen-focused government will be the Federal CIO Council. Through this top-level coordination, the CIO Council will continue to play a key role in the future of promoting and working to implement the next generation of e-government services, which takes advantage of the successes and lessons learned from the past 5 years. The Council will leverage the presidential e-government initiatives and lines of business which have matured and are ready to move to the next level of service for a more citizen-centric, collaborative approach toward the delivery of government information and services. Today, people demand and expect electronic services from their government. The advancements in private sector in providing user-friendly and time-saving electronic services have shown that the public benefits from these capabilities. There is an expectation that the American people for their government to deliver the same high-quality services while also protecting their privacy. As I've discussed today, through highlighting several accomplishments that we have achieved over the last 5 years, the government is making significant strides toward meeting these expectations with effective, collaborative, time-saving electronic services and providing citizens with increased opportunities to participate in government while managing the risk associated with these services. The E-Government Act of 2002 has proven to be a pivotal piece of legislation, enabling the federal government to recognize and take action on the changes the Internet and information technology has on society and government. Reauthorization of the E-Government Act will further promote online access to government information and services and show a commitment to implementing convenient and time-saving electronic services. In addition, a well-informed citizenry is essential to a healthy democracy, and the new provisions on the best practices for the search functionality included in the Reauthorization Act will leverage the advances made in search technology to help ensure government information and services remain easily accessible by everyone. Lastly, the reauthorization will allow the intent and the purpose of the E-Government Act to continue to be a driving force behind increased opportunities for the American public to participate in the government. I'd be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thanks, Ms. Evans. That was a very good beginning, and we will have questions for sure. John Lewis Needham is the manager of public sector content partnerships for Google Inc. I know I shouldn't do this, but I feel I have a responsibility to my family and friends to ask whether you were at the Google wedding this weekend.
I had to be here, so I...
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. Needham, thanks for being here. We're all great admirers and users of Google. Look forward to your testimony now.
Thank you. Chairman Lieberman, Ranking Member Collins, and members of the committee, it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning to discuss Google's role in making government more accessible to citizens. My name is John Lewis Needham. I am the manager of public sector content partnerships at Google. In this capacity, I lead the company's efforts to build public-private partnerships with government agencies in the U.S. and internationally. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Making government information more accessible doesn't just help citizens find the content they need. It also enables the government to provide services more efficiently to taxpayers and makes our democracy more transparent, accountable, and relevant. This committee has a long tradition of promoting these values, which Google shares. For example, Google Maps and Google Earth, which rely in part on government-provided geospatial data, can be used by the government to better serve its citizens. To offer two illustrations, the U.S. Geological Survey recently used Google Maps to show real-time data on earthquakes all around the world. And the National Park Service is using Google Earth to inform citizens about recreation opportunities across the country. This morning I'll focus my testimony on how people throughout our nation are using the power of web search engines to find and interact with their government. First, I'll share some trends in how Americans connect with government online. Second, I'll identify the challenges that citizens face in trying to find government information and services on the Internet. Third, I'll explain a technology known as the sitemap protocol, which enables government agencies to make their content more accessible to search engine users. And finally, I'll highlight a few of our successful partnerships with government and outline steps that agencies can take to make their websites more accessible. Let me start by describing how citizens today are connecting with government information online. According to recent research by the Pew Internet and American Life Project, at least 77% of U.S. Internet users go online to find some form of government information. We also see that Internet users are choosing search engines like Google as their preferred way to connect with the government. To clarify, search engines work by sending a software program to crawl the pages on public websites, adding this information to our index. As a result, when a Google user types a query into the search box, we very quickly access that index to return relevant search results. Here's an example. The National Institutes of Health's website, nih.gov, offers a rich collection of public health and medical information from the 27 institutes and centers that comprise NIH. Let's say that you're trying to find out the status of a study on avian flu. You may not be aware of one relevant NIH service, which is located at clinicaltrials.gov, or how to get directly to the page that lists all current avian flu-related studies. So you start your search on google.com. This is a likely scenario, given that very few Internet users go directly to the nih.gov website. In fact, according to our analysis of Internet traffic to NIH websites during July 2006, only 4% of visitors arrived at nih.gov web pages through typing the address nih.gov directly into their browser. This example is consistent with research by Google and others on the flow of Internet traffic, which indicates that as many as 4 out of 5 Internet users in the U.S. reach government websites by using Google and similar search engines. But if the information on a particular government website is not part of a search engine's index, citizens are bound to miss out on that information. Search engines have been connecting to online government resources, have made connecting to online government resources easier, but challenges remain. Specifically, we have found that many government agencies structure their websites in ways that prevent search engines from including their information in search results, often inadvertently. The most common barrier is a search form for a database that asks users to input several fields of information to find what they're looking for. Our crawlers cannot effectively follow the links to reach behind the search form. Let me offer an illustration. A citizen may be interested in locating the Environmental Protection Agency's enforcement actions regarding a particular company. So that user conducts a search on google.com with the company's name and the keywords EPA enforcement. The results of this search for EPA enforcement and a company name would include relevant information, obviously, but would not include information from the EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History Online database, which offers a list of enforcement reports for specific companies. This is because the information in this database, again, this EPA Enforcement and Compliance History Online database, cannot be included in a search engine's index. Now, EPA.gov is certainly not the only government website that search engines have difficulty indexing. In fact, we estimate that the information in all or part of 2,000 federal government websites is not included in search engine results. Now, with all that said, the good news is that there's a simple technical solution to address this problem. In 2005, Google introduced a standard called the Sitemap Protocol that helps ensure the accessibility of information on a website. It allows a website owner to produce a list or map of all web pages on the site and systematically communicate this information to search engines. When a federal agency places a sitemap on its website, search engines can readily identify the location of all pages on the site, including database records lying behind a search form. Using this sitemap, search engines are more likely to index and make visible to citizens the information on the agency's website. The sitemap protocol has been widely embraced by the search engine industry, including Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, Ask.com, and others. What this means is that by implementing sitemaps, a government agency can ensure that it is serving the American people, no matter which search engine they are using. Implementing the sitemap protocol is free and easy. It does not require site redesign, the purchase of new technology, or more than a few hours or days of a webmaster's time. Implementation involves creating a list of web pages in an acceptable format and adding the file that contains this list to a website. Google provides a variety of tools to accomplish this task, and we present them to public sector web managers at google.com/public sector. It's important to note today that I'm only talking about information that is already public. Content that is maintained on internal websites, including personally identifiable and classified information, should not be made accessible through any search engine and is not the type of information we're working to index. We believe that it would be technically simple for federal government agencies to produce a sitemap for the information on their websites, and that doing so would bring significant benefits. And we know that implementing the protocol is easy to do because we've worked with many government partners at all levels to take this step. For example, the Department of Energy's Office of Scientific and Technology Information operates a large database that makes research and development findings available to the public. OSDI developed a sitemap for its energy citations and information bridge services in just 12 hours, opening 2.3 million bibliographic records and full-text documents to crawling by search engines. After its implementation of sitemaps, OSTI saw a dramatic increase in traffic to its services as more citizens discovered these resources. Other federal agencies that have recently embraced sitemaps include the Government Accountability Office, which used the standard to make a database of 30 years of GAO reports visible to search engine users. The Library of Congress, which has made its American memory collections easier to find. The National Archives and Records Administration, which is now in the process of sitemapping the federal government's largest public database. And GovBenefits.gov, referenced by Administrator Evans, which now makes its profiles of over 1,000 benefit programs just one search away. And then OPM, referenced by you, Mr. Chairman, which is also taking the step of making its job postings more accessible to search engine users. At the state and local level, we've launched partnerships with the states of Arizona, California, Florida, Michigan, Utah, Virginia, and with the District of Columbia. These partnerships are making it easier for residents to uncover job postings, reports on school performance, and the professional license records of contractors. The private sector long ago recognized the increasing importance of web search, but unfortunately the federal government lags behind. Last month, this committee took an important step in elevating the profile of these efforts by voting in favor of the eGovernment Reauthorization Act of 2007. The Act directs OMB to create guidance and best practices for federal agencies to make their websites more accessible to external search engine crawlers. It also requires federal agencies to ensure their compliance and directs OMB to report annually to Congress on agencies' progress. We commend Chairman Lieberman, Ranking Member Collins, and the committee members for their leadership on this issue, and we look forward to working with you to enact this important legislation. Mr. Chairman, while my remarks today have focused on websites and search engines, it's clear that in the years ahead, government agencies will need to make information in other formats more accessible. In the Web 2.0 world, where more and more citizens are using blogs, wikis, online mapping, video sharing services, and social networking sites to communicate and collaborate with each other, there will be even more demand for government to bring information to citizens through these new platforms. We at Google are excited by the promise of this trend, and we're committed to continuing to better connect government to citizens. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Needham. Interesting testimony. Framed the question that the committee is very focused on, which is how to make publicly available government information easily accessible over a search engine. So we look forward to coming back to that discussion. Ari Schwartz is the Deputy Director of the Center for Democracy and Technology. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this public hearing on the future of e-government and inviting me to participate. The hearing falls, as several people have said, the hearing falls almost exactly 5 years after the passage of the e-Government Act. Unquestionably, the federal government's use of information technology to deliver information and services to citizens has improved over that time, and the e-Government Act deserves some credit for ensuring these important improvements. This accomplishment is due in no small part to you, Mr. Chairman, and your work and the members of this committee, and especially to Ms. Evans and the work of her staff on implementing the e-Government Act. However, over the past 5 years, we have also learned a great deal from agency implementation of the law about what areas can be improved. 5 years of experience, technological progress, and changes in user expectations should guide revisions to the e-Government Act to facilitate availability of resources to the public and privacy protections for the new technologies. In particular, I would like to discuss two major areas that we at the Center for Democracy and Technology believe could be addressed with a relatively minor amount of attention. The first of these is the area of accessibility of government information. This issue was addressed in the e-Government Act in several ways. For example, the Act called for the creation of a central government portal, now housed at USA.gov. The Act focused on standards of categorization for government information so they could be more easily found. And the Act created several new means for agencies to work together to help deliver information and services to citizens outside the bureaucratic silos. Simply put, the e-Government Act promotes the idea that citizens shouldn't need to know what agency has particular information or services in order to find that information. Today, my organization, CDT, along with our colleagues at OMB Watch, released a report that found that many of the newly created resources within agencies and across agencies are not available to individuals to find through the major commercial search engines and USA.gov, the very sources that Pew Internet Life Project says individuals are most likely to use to look for government information. Let me give 3 examples. The first, governmentloans.gov, It's a site that provides an easy-to-use central place to find, among other loans, all farm loans across the government. But if a small farmer were to enter the term farm loans or government farm loans into Google, Yahoo, Ask, Microsoft Live, or even USA.gov, they would not find this important resource. In another example of direct relevance to the Homeland Security mission of this committee, a search for the term New York radiation levels turns up some important information, but does not find the most basic graph from the Homeland Security Department website that's directly available. Even more troubling, basic government support answers to questions such as, I'm not allowed to visit my grandchildren, what can I do, that are directly answered on the Department of Health and Human Services Frequently Asked Questions page, can only be found by digging very deep into the agency's website today. As Mr. Needham explained, there are simple reasons why these searches do not find government information that is otherwise available on the World Wide Web. Either the agencies are blocking search engines for looking for this information, or they're not taking proactive steps to allow the information in the database to be searched. Making this information available is not difficult. In fact, many agencies have done so, including those listed by Mr. Needham earlier. We hope that other agencies will follow suit and that OMB will encourage them to do so. As more information is made easier to search, we are almost certain to find that some contain personally identifiable information. For example, when the government contracting databases were recently made more available, we found that the USDA was publicly releasing the Social Security numbers of their contractors. While this had been happening for years, it took the direct release on the Internet and easy searchability to find this clear violation of the Privacy Act. The eGovernment Act recognized that making more information available online was certain to raise new privacy concerns, and in order to address this problem, Congress took the bold step of requiring online privacy statements and privacy impact assessments for all new and changed collections and new databases. The privacy impact assessments were designed to provide greater transparency to how the government collects and uses personal information. Over the past 5 years, PIAs have become an essential tool to help protect privacy. They've been called one of the 3 pillars of the U.S. government privacy policy. Unfortunately, as with other privacy laws, the federal government has unevenly implemented the most basic transparency requirements of PIAs across the agencies. The guidance issued by OMB pursuant to the Act with respect to PIAs was vague and has simply not provided agencies with enough information to successfully implement PIAs unless they already had privacy staff on hand. While some agencies, like the Department of Homeland Security, have set a high standard for PIAs and have continued to improve them over time, the lack of clear guidance has led some agencies to create cursory PIAs or none at all. We hope that the best practices on PIAs called for in the eGovernment Reauthorization Act, passed by this committee already, can be a starting point for OMB to begin providing more leadership on privacy issues. Even then, the transparency provided by the PIAs must not be viewed as a full solution on privacy. Congress must begin to address more fundamental privacy issues within government agencies to ensure the trust of the American people. This should begin with a review of the Privacy Act and a look into whether the law is adequate to address how the federal government uses personal information today. We look forward to working with this committee to help address these critical privacy issues in more detail in the near future. Finally, I wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your announcement today on efforts toward openness in the legislative branch as well as in the executive branch. In particular, CDT has been a champion of gaining greater public access to Congressional Research Service reports since they were rated the #1 most wanted government document in a report we did in 1998. Since then, we have created the OpenCRS.com website to gather public reports, but the public should expect to get access to these important policy papers in a more systematic way. Therefore, we look forward to working with you on seeing this resolution move forward, and we thank you for your leadership on this important issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Schwartz. I appreciate your mention of the CRS. It's quite a remarkable office, much larger than most people would guess, and it has within it real scholars in an extraordinary array of subject matter, policy matter areas, and they do very high-quality work. So, and it ought to be public. It benefits us, but it ought to be public for all the many people out there who would benefit from seeing the product of this very high-level research. So thanks for your support for that. Mr. Wells, thanks for being here. We welcome your testimony now.
Thank you. My name is Jimmy Wales, and I am the founder of Wikipedia, as well as founder of the nonprofit charity, the Wikimedia Foundation, which hosts the Wikipedia project and several other related projects. I'm grateful to be here today to testify about the potential for the Wikipedia model of collaboration and information sharing, which may be helpful to government operations and homeland security. To introduce this potential, I'd like to first talk about our experience with Wikipedia. The original vision statement for Wikipedia was for all of us to imagine a world in which every single person on the planet is given free access to the sum of all human knowledge. That's what we're doing. Wikipedia currently consists of more than 9 million encyclopedia articles in more than 150 languages. While the English project is the largest, with over 2 million articles, this represents less than 1/4 of the total work. Wikipedia is currently increasingly important around the world, with more than 500,000 articles each in German and French, and more than 250,000 articles in several additional European languages, as well as more than 400,000 articles in the Japanese language. Despite being blocked in the People's Republic of China for the past 2 years, the Chinese language Wikipedia, which is primarily written by Chinese speakers in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and around the world, is a healthy community project with more than 150,000 articles and a strong growth rate. At a time when the United States has been increasingly criticized around the world, I believe that Wikipedia is an incredible carrier of traditional American values of generosity, hard work, and freedom of speech. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about how open collaborative media like wikis enable more efficient gathering and dissemination of useful information. Although it may be counterintuitive that opening up a wiki project leads to a more useful compendium of information, that is what our experience has been with Wikipedia, and I believe that experience can be the same for government agencies and operations as well. The method of production for Wikipedia is highly innovative, and in keeping with the old adage, necessity is a mother of invention, the story of how Wikipedia came to be is, I hope, both instructive and entertaining. Wikipedia was born of the famous .com crash. In the early days of the project, we worked together as a community with only a shoestring budget. If the financial climate had been better, then I would have likely turned to hiring employees to fill some critical functions. But because investment money and advertising revenue had completely dried up, we were pushed to find new solutions of community institutions to manage processes that would have been traditionally handled in a top-down manner. As a result, we pushed the limits of the new internet medium to create a new kind of community and a new kind of encyclopedia, one controlled by volunteer administrators and editors working together in a grand global conversation to create something new. According to firms that measure internet usage, Wikipedia is now the 8th most popular website in the world. And yet, despite competing in some sense with companies with billions of dollars to invest, Wikipedia survives on an incredibly modest budget. Last year, we spent around $1 million, and although this year we're spending a bit more, our budget is still minuscule compared to that of most other tech enterprises, even if you limit the comparison to other top websites. The First Amendment plays an important role in this project, as do traditional American ideals of individual responsibility. Under U.S. law, everyone writing in Wikipedia takes responsibility for his or her own actions, just as is true of everyone speaking in any public forum. The maintainer of this forum, the Wikimedia Foundation, has set down some fundamental codes of conduct, including but not limited to what constitutional scholars call time, place, and manner restrictions, and I have personally imposed policies which strive toward respect for others, quality writing, and the citing of sources. It's counterintuitive to some that an open discussion with virtually no top-down command and control structures can generate a high-quality encyclopedia. Nevertheless, it does. To illustrate our success improving the quality of Wikipedia, we are currently celebrating a study published in the German weekly news magazine Stern. According to this study, which just came out last week, Wikipedia scored higher in all but one categories than the standard German encyclopedia Brauhaus. The one standard we fell a little bit short on was readability. I promise we're working on that one every day. Now, given that Wikipedia is a public enterprise open to the entire public for collaboration and contribution, you may be wondering how wikis or the Wikimedia model may be useful to government. First of all, I want to note generally that there are other ways in which a wiki can be set up usefully, including setups that don't involve opening the wiki to the general public. You can control access, and a wiki might be useful to an agency that wants to facilitate information sharing up and down the hierarchy for increased vertical sharing, and controlled access wikis can be set up to share interagency information, so increased horizontal sharing as well. The main point here is there's no requirement of necessity for the tool of a wiki to be open to the general public in order for it to be useful. The word wiki comes from a Hawaiian word, wiki, meaning quick. The concept of a wiki was originally created by a famous programmer named Ward Cunningham, who lives in Portland, Oregon. The basic idea of a wiki is quick collaboration. When people need to work together to produce some document, the only option in the old days would be to email around a text file or word processing document. The wiki represents a crucial innovation, allowing for much greater speed. The most basic idea of a wiki is a website that can be easily edited by the readers, but modern wikis contain simple yet powerful features that allow for the users to control and improve the quality of the work. Wikipedia represents the power of a wiki open to the general public, but I believe the same wiki technology that powers Wikipedia is also being widely adopted inside many enterprises. And I'll note here in passing a couple of examples of this innovative use, one in private enterprise and one in the U.S. government. First, consider Best Buy. Recently, great companies such as Best Buy have been using wiki technology across the enterprise to foster faster information sharing and collaboration inside the enterprise. To give a hypothetical example of how this works, imagine a car stereo installer in a Best Buy store in Florida who discovers a faster or easier way to install a particular brand of stereo. This information can now be shared directly peer-to-peer to other stereo installers within the company across the entire store network. In the past, this kind of local information discovery was lost or isolated. One Harvard professor's research suggests that one key to successful use of new technologies is adoption. The tools must be easy to use and valuable in the day-to-day life of those using them. Now I'll take a quick look at Intellipedia. I'm not an expert on intelligence gathering, so I'll simply quote a useful resource, Wikipedia, regarding Intellipedia. The Intellipedia consists of 3 wikis. They are used by individuals with appropriate clearances from the 16 agencies of the United States intelligence community and other national security-related organizations, including combatant commands and federal departments. These wikis are not open to the general public. The Intellipedia uses MediaWiki, which is the same software used by Wikipedia, and the officials who have set up the project say that it will change the culture of U.S. intelligence community, which has been widely blamed for failing to connect the dots before the attacks of September 11th. Tom Fingar has gone on record describing one of Intellipedia's intelligence successes. Fingar told DefenseNews.com that a worldwide group of intelligence collectors and analysts used Intellipedia to describe how Iraqi insurgents are using chlorine in IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They developed it in a couple days, interacting in Intellipedia, Fingar said. No bureaucracy, no mother may I, no convening meetings. They did it and it came out pretty good. That's going to continue to grow. As you can see, just as the dot-com crash forced private industry to think about more efficient and effective ways to use digital technology, the attacks on the United States forced our intelligence community to explore innovative ways to share intelligence among agencies. This brings us back to what might be called the lesson of Wikipedia, that an open platform allowing many stakeholders to participate can facilitate information sharing in an extremely cost-efficient manner, and it can take advantage of a wider range of knowledgeable people than traditional information sharing processes do. Good democratic governments strive to be responsive to citizens' needs. In order to do so, it's important that governments use technology wisely to communicate with the public and also to allow the public to communicate with the government. It's my belief that the government of the United States should be using wiki technology for both internal and public-facing projects. As with any large enterprise, internal communications problems are the cause of many inefficiencies and failures. Just as top corporations are finding wiki usage exploding because the tool brings about new efficiencies, government agencies should be exploring these tools as well. The U.S. government has always been premised on responsiveness to citizens, and I think we all believe good government comes from broad, open public dialogue. I therefore also recommend that U.S. agencies consider the use of wikis for public-facing projects to gather information from citizens and to seek new ways of effectively collaborating with the public to generate solutions to the problem that citizens face. Thank you for inviting me to testify about the potential for inviting the Wikipedia model to improve our government's ability to share and gather information for increased security, for increased governmental responsiveness in our open society, and for the preservation of democratic values. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wells. That was great. And necessity mothered a great invention. I love the story of the founding of Wikipedia, and if I may say so, and I appreciate your saying in some ways it is classically American, and this is a part of American history, American experience that goes right back to the beginning. It always struck me as instructive that among the founding generation of Americans were some remarkable inventors, beginning with Franklin and Jefferson. And obviously this continued in many ways throughout our history with the extension of the American frontier and all the advances that have occurred since. But you've really done that along with colleagues. in this age, so I thank you for it, and I thank you for the suggestions that you've made about how this collaborative technology can help us in government do our job better. I'll come back to that in a few minutes, but let me start with this question that we were focused on in the reauthorization, which is the problem of access through search engines. Mr. Needham, you testified that in whole or part, there are 2,000 federal government websites that are not included in search engine results. And I wanted to ask you why, to just expand a bit on what you said. I know you had a reference to EPA and NIH, but is it accidental? Is it that they're not going the extra mile to make this happen, or is there some policy or even just plain laziness that's bringing us to a point where we should not be?
Right, happy to speak to that. So I think the principal factor that we can look to is that governments produce lots of information and have a mandate to disseminate that information. And to do that, agencies rely on large databases to hold public records and present government programs to citizens. So that's one factor. Lots of information, hard to disseminate it efficiently. But these databases, the EPA example I gave and many others I could point to at the federal, state, and local level, they typically present to the user a search form by which that user then types in keywords to find the report they're seeking or the record or what have you. These search forms cannot be navigated by search engine crawlers. We cannot reach behind to see what's there and add those records to our index.
Right.
And because, as we've experienced in our communication with agencies, they tend not to think as much about how citizens are going about finding information, but rather about how their website is presented to citizens. They've not taken, by and large, this step of providing us a means of finding those records behind that search form. And that's what the sitemap protocol technology enables. It provides the agency a simple mechanism for pointing out to a search engine crawler, these are all the records in this database, come here and crawl them.
I appreciate the answer. So that you've now created a tool that should make it much easier for websites, federal government websites, to be included in search engine results. Let me go back to you, Ms. Evans, and ask you one, if you want to add at all to Mr. Needham's answer about why agencies haven't made some agencies haven't made their web pages available to commercial search engines.
Well, I think Mr. Needham hit on the first issue about it's a lot of information, and therefore we try to figure out the best way to efficiently deliver it, which is through databases and organization that way. The other part, which Mr. Needham has also highlighted, is the partnership that we need to work out with commercial search capabilities, because many times when we start delivering these next level of services, what we've also done is streamline the support services associated with those. So in talking with Google and other search companies, we try to present the information in a context. We may not be doing it in the most efficient way to provide a context around it. For example, on Gov benefits, when we initially talked, we have a whole support mechanism behind that. So we try to filter out so that we don't create frustration in the citizen as well, and present a whole series of results to them. And what they do is they see what they're basically eligible for. Now, what we need to do is work in partnership, which is what your reauthorization allows us to do, is that there's a balance between us trying to streamline our backline and making sure that the citizen really knows what they're eligible for, and also making the information commercially available to the search engines, because it's all out there. We just want to make sure that we're providing it in a context so that we don't create more frustration.
So leaving aside matters that we might not want to have too easy access to because of privacy concerns are classified, is there any policy reason that would justify, any other policy reason that would justify limiting access to otherwise publicly available information on federal websites through search engines?
No, sir. The way that we've put together the policies, but we would need to go back and relook at that to see if any agencies may be interpreting it that way. But the way that the policies based on the current e-government act, it is for greater dissemination of public available information. To take, and then also the administration has passed an executive order, again, supporting the Freedom of Information Act, saying, look even further at your information and make this available before it's asked for. You know, so that information is out there, but we do have to do it in a way that it's easily accessible through the means that citizens research and look for the information.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and because that certainly is our intention, that except for privacy and classification reasons, that everything else should be maximally and as easily possible available to the public, including through search engines. Mr. Schwartz, do you want to add anything to this discussion?
I think that Ms. Evans made a good point about the context issue. I think it's an important one, but I also think that the American people are smart and they know how to use search engines. And if they find things, I mean, while you may be frustrating a few people, you don't want to block information from the vast majority of people who would be able to figure out the context and use that information for the minority of people that can't figure it out, that might be frustrated by that. So I think that there's sort of a balance there of how do you give the right context but make the information as maximally available as possible and maximally searchable as possible.
And if I may add a comment on this as well.
Please.
We worked with the state of Arizona earlier this year to open up 8 of their major databases, which weren't initially designed to be crawled by search engines, and the pages that they present to users indeed may not be utterly clear to the user on first blush, but they did so. They opened these databases, and as we indicated in a report we published, or a case study we published yesterday on this website I referenced, google.com/public sector, their administrators of these agencies whose databases were opened are very pleased with the results of citizens for the first time learning about, for example, a license record of contractors and of real estate developers and so forth. So we know it can work because we've seen it work.
It's a good example. Mr. Wells, do you want to get into this?
Yeah, they actually, in many cases, you know, we've heard about the difficulty when the web crawler comes to a form and they have to, instead of clicking on something that says Alabama, someone would have to type in Alabama, and the search crawler isn't able to figure out what to type there. But we actually find, even in the Wikipedia context, which is written by human beings, that there are some websites that even when you type in the right thing and you submit and you get the information you want, you can't link directly to that. And so someone who's writing something, trying to explain something, and they want to link to a particular statute or a particular regulation or a particular piece of information that's been published by the government, if they aren't able to cut and paste that URL and put it into Wikipedia, then even with a human involved, it's very frustrating. The only thing you can do is give someone instructions. Go to this page, type in this, select the third link. It can be very frustrating.
That's a good point. Ms. Evans, want to respond?
Well, all I can say is that we are very open to making this more collaborative. We have examples, and I would like to actually share one, is that we are embracing this technology and we are using it more ourselves. I mean, EPA was raised as an example here of not making information available, but they recently held what they called the Puget Sound Partnership, where they went and for 36 hours they worked directly out there trying to figure out how to do the information using the technology, what parts of their information were not easily accessible, could they set up these pages, could they do all that. We're taking those lessons learned there. Molly from EPA, the CIO from EPA, is sharing that now with the other CIOs so that we can take these types of things and the frustration of the information that we're putting out there and then try to fix it so that we can make sure that it's readily available.
Okay, good. That's an encouraging example. Let me ask you another question about where we are now. As you know, Section 204 of the E-Government Act required the development of an official Internet portal that would be organized by function or topic instead of the boundaries of agency jurisdiction. And that is USA.gov, which now receives, I gather, almost 1.9 million visits per week. I wanted to ask you if you've done any work that would enable you to tell us how you think a user's experience is enhanced by using USA.gov instead of attempting to find their information through search engines?
Well, the way that USA.gov is set up and GSA really manages this very well, at least we think they manage it very well. They do hold user focus groups constantly throughout the year to really measure the customer experience, the citizen experience, and how to reorganize it. This is a good example of us and our interpretation of putting a context around the federal government information and then trying to give the citizen an enriched experience when they come, and that it is the authoritative source for the federal government launching off of there, that you're going to authoritative sites. They did a lot of market research. It used to be called firstgov.gov. They did research just in the name itself and changed it based on their market research and changed it to USA.gov. And just the simple name change of that increased the usage by 67%. So they are constantly looking at customer satisfaction. All the e-government initiatives are measuring customer satisfaction usage, and then as well as how we can go back and really deploy it and improve it. And we make all those metrics publicly available, so we set targets. Several of the initiatives may not necessarily be meeting their targets, but we do set the targets and the metrics, and we do publish our actual performance against those metrics.
Do you think enough people know, I mean, the numbers are pretty good, obviously, but enough people know and take advantage of the service that USA.gov provides?
I think that if I do it myself, so I'll be honest. I go to Google,
Yeah.
and then I go to USA.gov when I'm looking for specific things, but I launch into Google or Yahoo or Ask.com just like anyone else does, because I want to see how my services come up. But I will tell you that the other benefit to having the government-wide initiatives such as the Federal Internet Portal and USA.gov was those services were available when crisis or things happen within the federal government that we have to mount an immediate response because the infrastructure is already there. USA.gov, because of its integration of the services, was able to provide support services to the State Department, like answering passport questions. They can build out that and complement what the State Department is doing. As a matter of fact, they actually answer all their calls now. We get a common set of answers because USA.gov is tied into every agency, so they handle all the misdirected emails. So if anybody does write directly to a department or an agency, it's automatically routed to their set of agents so that they can answer the questions on a consistent basis. So there's a lot of integration of back-end office types of services that we've done through these government-wide initiatives that when something happens, like the VA situation where we lost that data, USA.gov and those services built up within 48 hours. They had the capability, and they put all that information out on their website. They had RSS feeds set up, which are automatic sign-ups, so that people can get the update of the information as we changed it. And we also had 1-800 service so that we could answer 240,000 calls a day for the veterans. So we tried to put all of that together as an integrated channel so that we're providing the solutions to the citizens. So it's a more complicated question than just, does everyone know USA.gov?
Yeah. From what I can see, while there's been progress, I've been disappointed that the development of regulations.gov has not opened up the rulemaking process to a greater degree. CRS, which we referred to, recently reported, and I quote, "It still appears that relatively few comments have been coming to the agencies via regulations.gov compared to other methods of comment," end of quote. Further, in relation to what we've been discussing today, the data in regulations.gov cannot be found by outside search engines. So give us your status report on how regulations.gov is doing, and tell us whether you agree that more needs to be done to facilitate public access to tracking and ability to comment on regulations.
So the short answer is yes, sir, more needs to be done on regulations.gov. The other part of it is about searching and doing the docket systems that are back within the agencies and making that information available. Again, this would be one where we would have to partner with commercial search providers about the best way to make that information available, because we know that that's a limitation right now within it. Agencies do have to post all the regulations, proposed rules at regulations.gov, but what we wanted to do was make sure that the public had the availability to comment through multiple channels. So the comments can go directly to an agency, not necessarily all comments have to come through regulations.gov. And that was flexibility that the agency still wanted to maintain. Some of the things that are being looked at with regulations.gov, because this is really not a technology issue. This is really looking at how do we want the business of rulemaking to evolve. This is really some of the basic things that I've asked as a technologist going forward is, do more comments make a better rule? Those are things that I think the way the technology is working, in that you see through the development of functions like Wikipedia, that there are arguments on both sides of that, and that's what needs to be looked at. And we are in partnership. We jointly manage that with a OIRA administrator, Susan Dudley, and these are things that she's embracing because she does want more transparency. She does want more openness in the regulation process, and so we're working with that. There is an ongoing study right now with the American Bar Association that we've been meeting with them of improvements and requirements and things that we could do to regulations.gov that would just make it easier to use so that more people would want to put comments in there as well.
Mr. Wales, would you say, based on the Wikipedia experience, that as a matter of policy, or that we could conclude that more comments would make better rules?
I think so, yeah. But I think one of the interesting things about Wikipedia, what's innovative about the wiki technology is rather than just commenting, people are collaborating and finding ways to compromise. And so, I mean, there are some very practical problems, of course, that are faced with open commenting. Spammers, crazy people, sort of all kinds of bad behaviors, and you have to think about how do you balance the desire for allowing the general public to comment and not to censor their remarks because maybe somebody doesn't agree with them, versus well, it isn't censorship to say, you know, links to Viagra advertisements is not really a comment on most regulations anyway. And so I think that these things do take very careful study. I think people can be very simplistic and say, well, they should allow the public to comment on regulations. Well, sure, but how are we going to help the public to come in as a part of a responsible community and do that in a way that everyone finds useful? Good,
thoughtful answer. Mr. Needham and Mr. Schwartz, any thoughts about this question, about how we can improve the basically regulations.gov?
Well, you are correct that this is an example of an eGov program website among the many that I've referred to that are not visible to search engine users, and that and this I think was more of a comment on the USA.gov discussion earlier. That let's say that someone is a farmer that grows tomatoes in Florida, isn't too plugged into the regulatory process that governs that industry, and searches on Google for tomatoes transport. If this resource were crawled and indexed and integrated in search engines, including USA.gov, this grower might be more engaged in that regulatory process, learn that there is, in fact, a rule that's under comment. And the point being made here is that not every citizen realizes when they're looking into their health or their business or education, housing, the government provides a service that's relevant. And that's why it's critical that all the information of the federal government that is public be in all search engines possible, and not simply through USA.gov, where a user is consciously looking for information from its government.
Well said. Mr. Schwartz?
I want to take on two different points there. The first, the one that Mr. Needham just raised, in terms of when we first did our report looking at what kinds of searches were coming up, it was during the polar bear comment period that the Interior Department was having that had more comments than any other
whether the polar bear was going to be listed as an endangered species.
Exactly, and we did some searches on that, and you could not find that on any search engine at all. I mean, it was one of the first things that really got us on this issue to say, I mean, this is the best known one of the best-known comment periods in the history of the federal government. I mean, the most activity in terms of comments, and you couldn't find it on a search engine except for going through secondary parties. And part of that was because it wasn't on regulations.gov. Eventually, GPO sitemapped their site, and then you could at least find it through GPO. That's just one example of there are these people that are searching for this in a way that they hear that there's on the news that there's a comment period on whether the polar bear should be an endangered species. They want to comment. They go to search on Google. They don't get the result that they expect. So I think of that as the regulations.gov in that space is exactly the kind of shows that concern very acutely. I want to follow a little bit on Mr. Wales' comments and Ms. Evans' comments about regulations.gov, and we were hoping by this point that we could be at the point where we're trying out new technologies for regulations and public comment periods.
What were you thinking of?
Well, I mean, using the wiki model. I mean, I think a lot of people would think of it as, you just put up a rule and then people go and attack it and you get both sides. But the really interesting thing about what happens on Wikipedia is the commentary pages and the notes pages, which are actually much more similar to a traditional rulemaking than you would think. I mean, if you go through and you look through how they go about making determinations and people giving justifications based on facts and what the rules are for how that's done, I think we could learn a lot from just trying out new technologies. Not saying that it should supplant the old ways of rulemaking, but perhaps we can, in certain kinds of rulemakings, we can come up with a more collaborative discussion rather than the traditional conflict policy that kind of governs public comment periods today.
That's very interesting. There's another institution around Washington that needs more collaboration to be effective. Congress. Maybe we should form a Congresspedia. Another thing we don't do here, if I may continue this particular flight, gaining now with the welcoming our colleague from Hawaii, that you told us that the word wiki is Hawaiian for quickly, that one thing we don't do enough around here is to legislate wikily. So anyway, I welcome Senator Kaka. I'm going to ask one more series of questions, and I'm going to yield to you, Dan. Thanks for being here. I want to go directly to you, Mr. Wells, and thank you again for being here. To take up one of the, I guess it's a criticism or a skepticism about Wikipedia, which is that inaccurate content can result when larger numbers of participants outweigh the contribution of a few experts. In your testimony, you said that controls or kind of management devices can be put in to provide, I like the term, fine-grained control to access and edit information. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that, particularly, but generally with regard to Wikipedia, but also as it may affect collaborative technologies to be used by the federal government.
Absolutely. So within Wikipedia, the software, the MediaWiki software that we use, puts several tools into the hands of the community so that they can manage the quality of the content. Within the community, there are administrators who are elected from the community, and they are generally chosen after they've proven their worth over a period of time in terms of being good writers, thoughtful editors, kind and helpful to others, the kinds of values that we look for in an administrator. And the administrators have the ability to do things like temporarily lock pages. We can do that in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that's been very successful is what we call to semi-protect a page, which means anyone can edit that page as long as they've been around and had an account at Wikipedia for 4 days. So a very low threshold for entry into participation, but this really helps us in cases where a particular article has been highlighted in a news story or something like this, and there are a lot of people, newcomers coming in and things like that. Certain articles on very controversial topics tend to be semi-protected pretty much all the time. An example would be George W. Bush, for example.
Right. So let me understand, really interesting. So the administrator is empowered to essentially make a judgment call if the administrator thinks that a page may be subject to piling on or whatever.
That's right.
Because it's controversial.
Yeah, and a lot of times we try to keep this to be something of a cooling off period. In other words, something's been in the news, we'll semi-protect it for a few days until everybody relaxes a little bit.
Right.
And there are over 1,000 active administrators in the English Wikipedia. And of course, they have conversations and discussions and disputes amongst themselves over whether things should be protected or unprotected. Occasionally, some brave soul will say, I think we should unprotect the George W. Bush article. They unprotect it and say, well, I'll watch it and make sure there's no vandalism. And usually about 6 hours later, they exhausted, protect it again and go to sleep. So there are some areas of high potential for pranksters and people like that end up semi-protected most of the time. We also have the ability to block IP numbers. So if there's some form of misbehavior and it's coming from, the typical case would be a high school, a parliament building, this sort of thing. That's a joke, actually, although it's happened. We'll see some sort of juvenile behavior, and normally what we do in a case like that is we just simply block that IP number from editing Wikipedia for 24 hours or so. Hopefully that'll just calm them down. So that's another sort of tool in our pack. We have things like recent changes. So there are people who monitor every changes that's coming in. Individual users have personalized watch lists. So if you're a particular expert on birds, for example, I met a scientist at Cornell University who's an ornithologist. He monitors a lot of the bird articles. He doesn't have time to do it personally every day, but about once a week, he said, he comes in and checks out a lot of the bird articles, and he can quickly look at the change, just the change in an article, rather than having to reread the whole thing from scratch. He can quickly see what's changed since the last time he's been there to make sure it seems suitable to him. So all of those kinds of tools are important. But probably one of the most important tools of all is that the entire history of every article is kept in the database, with very rare exceptions. Occasionally we completely delete things from the database, privacy violations or other legal reasons. But typically if it's simply a bad version of an article or something like that, the old versions are there. And so if somebody comes in and begins to damage an article, it's typically one click for anyone to go back in and save the previous version as the current version. And so it's hard to do any damage at Wikipedia. Whenever you come in and make a change, you're actually just creating a new version, and if you've done some harm, someone can quickly come behind you and fix it.
Very interesting. So, and I presume, though, it's a different kind of activity, that you'd say that some of those methods you have for protecting the integrity of the system are also relevant for collaborative technologies used by the federal government.
Absolutely. Some of these techniques are not necessarily as useful in internal-facing wikis. If you have an internal wiki and everybody who's editing it is logged in and they are an employee, typically you don't need to block them from editing. You fire them or whatever you need to do to tell them to stop misbehaving. But other of the tools, for example, the history, you can easily have people who disagree, and someone will say, you made these edits to this article, but I don't feel that it really improved it. I'm going to go back to the previous version, and then let's go to the talk page and hash this out. So these kinds of tools are applicable for internal wikis and external, but a lot of the concepts may be valuable outside even the wiki framework. The idea of understanding that if you can generate a thoughtful community, you can have that community do a lot of the policing that otherwise it would be not cost effective to do.
Yeah.
A similar example would be Craigslist. Craigslist, people post advertisements. They are free advertisements, and the staff at Craigslist is really too small to really supervise and monitor everything, but their community can simply, if you see something that's spam or is somehow inappropriate, they can simply flag it, and if it gets flagged a certain number of times, it just disappears. Overall, this does a pretty good job, and those are the kinds of techniques that I think we're going to be exploring in the industry over the next few years.
It's fascinating and actually encouraging, because there's a kind of confidence there based on some experience you've had that in the end the better part of human nature prevails.
Well, one of the classic examples I always give is to imagine that you're going to design a restaurant. And you think to yourself, in this restaurant, we're going to be serving steak. And since we're serving steak, the customers will have access to knives. And when people have access to knives, they might stab each other. So to design our restaurant, we're going to put everybody inside a cage. Well, this makes a bad society. That's not the kind of open society we want to live in. But unfortunately, when people are engaging in web design, this is often exactly the kind of thinking that they have. They think of all of the bad things people might do and design everything around those worst case scenarios, rather than saying, oh, you know what, let's actually keep things as open as we can and wait until we see the bad behavior and then think about what to do about it. We call the police, we get an ambulance, or in a digital context, we simply change it back to the old version.
I'm going to stop now and yield to Senator Akaka. Thanks again for being here, Dan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing on implementation and reauthorization of eGovernment Act. And I see here on the program that it's the eGovernment 2.0. And I feel myself been a strong advocate for transparency in government, as well as privacy for all Americans, and work in trying to keep that on a top level of our lives here in the United States, and want to continue to keep emphasizing privacy and expanding access to appropriate government information. And that's where I come from, and I want to thank the chairman for what he's doing along these lines and working hard at it. I'd like to ask the first question to Karen Evans from OMB, and to ask you and tell you that making government information more available to the public by posting it online is important for government transparency. However, I'm concerned that information in federal forms posted online are often written in, let me put it this way, bureaucratic language that is difficult for many Americans to understand. This can be especially burdensome for those helping people to access the information online, especially librarians. And my question to you is, what steps is OMB taking to ensure that government information posted online is clear, well organized, and readily understandable?
Well, sir, it's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for being here again.
I believe that our current policies that we've issued dealing with the implementation of the E-Government Act speaks to that very issue about talking about having information out there accessible, easily defined, easily understandable. How the agencies have actually gone about that and executed that is what we're discussing more today. I believe that the Federal CIO Council, which was also codified through this act, has a leadership role in this, as well as the web forum that we've established through USA.gov, that they then work on best practices. They continuously put together toolkits for content managers, for agencies to put that information out. But based on many of the things that my colleagues have said today, I believe we'll have to go back and revisit many of those to see if we really are doing it in the best way that we can, or should they be updated so that things are going out in a way that citizens understand them and can easily find them.
I'd like to follow up by asking Mr. Wales about your thoughts on this kind of an organization. I was interested, as soon as I sat here, to hear the chairman use the word wiki. And as you know, in Hawaiian, that means to hurry up or do it quickly. When I saw pedia, I was thinking of walking fast, but it's along the line of encyclopedias. And of course, the whole thing comes to me as being important to knowledge and facts, and done in such a way where people can understand them and absorb them and use them for their benefits. So in this case, in this question that I asked Ms. Evans, just wanted your thoughts about that.
Well, I think that one of the interesting things that we see is that the communities who come together, one of the things that they really prize is making information available to people in a way that they can understand. And that's something that often specialists or bureaucrats who are often specialists of some kind really can sometimes struggle with. Not intentionally, but just because they live in a certain world and speak a certain language, and it's very hard for them to really remember and get at that language is very hard for other people to understand. This is one of the areas that I would recommend that the federal government agencies consider doing some public-facing wiki project experiments where perhaps what the general public could do is come in and help explain things in more plain language, perhaps with the assistance of staff, at the agencies to monitor the quality and things like that. But this is a potentially fabulous way of getting at things, particularly in areas where there hasn't traditionally been really funding available to explain some arcane regulations to the general public because the regulations aren't meant to apply necessarily to the general public, but they may have an interest in knowing and a right to know. So I think there's a lot of potential here.
Well, thank you. I want to thank both of you for those answers. Yes.
I'd like to add one thing to this. So as we're talking about how to do this, the government, we're ready to roll out the new website dealing with the Transparency Act. And there's going to be an event tomorrow. Included in that is the wiki technology, the collaborative technology, to do exactly the types of activities that you're talking about, because the Federal Financial Accountability Transparency Act has a very specific requirement about having citizens interact and continuously take feedback back on how the website's developed, how we do these requirements, how information is available, how we're putting all this information out. So we have embraced this. It's going to be included in this rollout. We're going to be using this collaborative technology to really take a look at how we've interpreted the law, how we're displaying it, and then take the feedback back on future requirements, future enhancements, and also the actual text around it based on the issues that you're now highlighting. Because, as you said, we write in a certain way which may have absolutely no meaning to the people who are looking at the data. So it will be there. We're going to be actively taking this information and requirements, and we're hoping that they will define and refine their own requirements going forward.
Well, I want you to know that this issue is especially important to me. I recently introduced the Plain Language in Government Communications Act, which is S-2291, along with Senators Levin, Copper, McCaskill, and Obama, requiring that agencies write information released to the public in a clearer and more understandable manner. And so this is why I'm really interested in this issue. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
Do you have any more questions, Senator Okaka? Do you have more questions?
I do.
Maybe I'll do a round and I'll come back to you. I thank you. And this time I'll go by the clock now that you're here. One of the, this is not just the Governmental Affairs Committee. We're now, over the last few years, the Homeland Security Committee. So we have a special responsibility with regard to protecting the homeland both from terrorist attack and from natural disasters. one of the remarkable uses, and this is where Wikipedia becomes itself a kind of public service beyond the pedia, the information part of it. I gather, I've been told, that during the recent California wildfires, Wikipedia became, for many, many people, the place of choice for the most recent information about the movement of the wildfires. So people who were living there were following it. Intellipedia, which we mentioned earlier, was used to allow various agencies to file status updates and communicate with each other during those fires. I have heard, and maybe Mr. Needham can confirm this, that when Steve Fawcett, who I was privileged to know, the great adventurer, was missing, that a group of his friends, I think, formed their own site and divided the enormous space in which they thought his plane had gone down. And I believe they must have used Google Earth. And they each took a section of it and searched it, really an unbelievable capacity. In fact, they found, I guess, some missing planes and things that have been missing for years, but they unfortunately didn't find his. So I wanted to start with you, Mr. Wales, and ask, what lessons, what kind of opportunities can we draw from these experiences which can help us perhaps? The nice thing about what you've done is that it self-generates, so it doesn't require a government mandate. But sometimes it may require a government incentive. So are there any things you can think of, and I'll ask the other panelists if they have thoughts, about how we may bring this potential use of Wikipedia and even Google Earth and other, or just awareness of collaborative possibilities to bear to both help us prevent and then particularly respond to disasters, both natural and human.
So this tendency of Wikipedia to do a really good job of covering sort of major crisis events is something that we first saw on September 11th, actually. We were a very young project at that time, and on September 11th, we still had very few articles about anything, frankly, and you could turn on the television and there was not much to be said, right? So all you saw was the video playing over and over and over, the planes crashing into the towers. While at Wikipedia, the volunteers began frantically working to fill in all the kinds of background information that people might want to know. So we didn't have an article that morning about the World Trade Center, so quickly somebody started the article. There would be articles created that day about things like the architect who designed it, the article about the Pentagon, about all the airlines that were in some way involved that day. All that kind of background information. We were still a very young project at the time. Nowadays, we see that happen in a much more broad way. Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami, the recent wildfires. People get very active in participating, and one of the great powers of this model is that we're able to bring to bear more individual minds to the problem than almost anybody else. So we can have a couple hundred people who are scouring through the web and who also have their own personal prior knowledge of where to find different kinds of information and begin pulling that information together in a coherent framework so that people can access it and understand it. In general, if we want to make sure that that process proceeds efficiently, basically all of the kinds of initiatives that we've been talking about today, making sure that when our volunteers are able to use Google or Yahoo to find a piece of information on the federal government website, they're able to then highlight and amplify the volume of the signal there for the general public, so that if there's something important going on and FEMA issues a statement, that statement will first be findable in the search engines, but it'll also be immediately available for the volunteers to analyze and integrate into the Wikipedia article.
Mr. Evans, let me ask you, and I hadn't thought about it before preparing for this hearing, to ask DHS or FEMA whether in crisis situations today, those federal agencies are attempting to create sites on which information can be shared, particularly from within the affected areas, and whether you think they should.
Well, we do have two initiatives. The one in particular is disaster management. It's not shared in an open community to the extent that the Wikipedia communities of interest, that type of approach is set forward, but it is shared within the first responder community based on a lot of the things that we're talking about, and that information is posted out there. It is a tool set. Could it be more collaborative? Should it be more open to the public? That's what we provide the environment so that the local communities can use that information as it's being posted by the federal agencies to be able to respond, so that they're all using the same GIS, they're all using the same type of information to be able to respond. But that's an initiative that is poised and ready to move to the next evolution of services. All of these are foundational. They have the basic, and what they really needed to do was break down the silos of those communities working together. It's not so much the technology, it's how that community works together and responds between the fire department, the police department,
Right.
and those guys. And so a lot of what our initiatives have done have brought those communities of interest together. This now allows us to take it to the next level, directly involve the citizenry, where it needs to be and how it should be involved. And the technology will allow us to do that.
I hope you'll do that because, in a really remarkable way that could not have been foreseen by earlier generations, the internet capabilities allow us, as you all know, to create community activity in a level which was unheard of,
Right.
and in that sense can have community, to build a sense of community where often today in actual communities it doesn't exist,
Right.
in actual geographic communities. I'm with Senator Akaka's permission, I'm going to let Mr. Needham get into this.
Sure. I just want to echo
Over
the
my
observations made here and give two examples of what we're describing here of the use of these tools in the context of an emergency. With the recent wildfires in Southern California, a public broadcaster in the area in San Diego used the Google Maps service to provide information to the public aggregated from multiple emergency management agencies so that a user could go straight to Google Maps, not suffer from the lag time one sometimes experiences with a government website which doesn't have the capacity that Google can put behind its service. And there, citizens found information on evacuation routes, on the reach of the wildfires, the areas at risk, and so forth. A second example I'll give, which is relevant to web search, which is what I've come here today to talk about. Recently there was an earthquake in the Bay Area, the largest in the last 20 years. And I happened to be there with my family that recently moved to California, and we were obviously unnerved to feel ourselves shaking for the first time in an earthquake. So I grabbed my mobile phone and searched for Earthquake California. The first search result was a U.S. Geological Survey website where I was able to view in real time there the gravity of the earthquake, see a visualization of its reach, and know that we were in fact safe and that we could proceed home and so forth. So these are examples of tools that are built on government information that are in the hands of citizens in a way that we didn't have before.
That's great. Great example. Thanks. Senator Akaka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Mrs. Swartz, overall, what is your opinion regarding how well agencies are fulfilling the requirements of the eGovernment Act, especially in relation to privacy provisions?
Thank you, Senator Akaka. The issue of this is Section 208 of the Act is the main privacy section, and for the most part, the agencies, it's really been a mixed picture from the agencies. We've seen some agencies really do exceptionally well in creating what are really the best privacy impact assessments in the world. The Department of Homeland Security actually has a site dedicated to promoting how privacy impact assessments should be done within the agency. They have privacy professionals, a large team of privacy professionals that can work with different parts of the agencies. But yet, we have other agencies that have not implemented it well at all. Some, we heard the latest percentages from Ms. Evans, and I actually missed the numbers, but there's still some that are not implementing PIAs when they're supposed to be. And which I think should be the biggest concern. But there's also some agencies that are only doing them in a cursory fashion. For example, my organization wrote to Secretary Rice about the State Department's passport program and why, for their privacy impact assessment, they really only had a half of a page privacy impact assessment publicly available for citizens for what should be one of the most privacy-sensitive documents that we have. We never received a full answer as to why we don't have a greater privacy impact assessment, trying to figure out exactly how information is being transferred using the new electronic chip in the passport, et cetera. I mean, we have gone over some of those issues, and I think we feel that some of the security measures that they've taken are good measures, but in the long run, there should be publicly available information about what kind of steps the State Department has taken to show this kind of a balance. And so even among those that are doing PIAs, we are seeing that they're very poorly done. I think that's part of that's gets to the larger issue, which is we don't have, some agencies have a good privacy program in them, like DHS, mostly because it was written into the Department of Homeland Security Act when Senator Lieberman introduced it originally. It had a privacy provision in it. You had a good chief privacy officer who came into the department at the time that it was formed. We haven't seen that in other agencies, and because we don't have that kind of leadership within agencies, we haven't been able to see a good program put into place. And that also means we're not even seeing the letter of the law of the Privacy Act put into place. And the Privacy Act over time has weakened because of the way technology has formed. So I think we need to take we hope that we urge the Congress to take a broader look at some of the issues around privacy and the Privacy Act, and we hope that this committee, which has jurisdiction over the Privacy Act, will do that.
Well, thank you for that, because we would like to receive recommendations as to how we can bring this about with all agencies. So thank you for that. Ms. Evans, GAO found that agencies routinely collect information about individuals from commercial sources, but often do not perform privacy impact assessments. However, according to OMB's guidance, agencies should be performing PIAs when they make systematic use of commercial sources. My question to you is, what is OMB doing to ensure that the use of these commercial sources is addressed in PIAs and other evaluations?
Well, first, we did issue a policy memo back in February of 2005 where all agencies have to have the designation of a senior agency official for privacy. What we have done is last year we've incorporated annual reporting now into the overall annual report that we submit to Congress for the Federal Information Security Management Act in March. So last year was the first year that we actually provided a report on government-wide privacy aspects, which included PIAs and agencies conducting PIAs, doing the PIAs, and the systems that were appropriate. To get to Mr. Schwartz's issue and your issue, sir, what we've added this year, which we will be reporting for going forward, is the quality of that program. We've asked the Inspector Generals to review the process that the agency uses internally to determine and assess the quality of the PIA itself, because we believe that represents the whole thing from start to finish. How you decide what information you're going to use, whether you publish it, whether you're collecting it in the systems of records and notice, how you publish that, how you put it out, and then how you then take it and use it in an IT system. So when we submit the report this year in March, we will also have additional statistics about the quality that each agency has in that process. Then we will be going back to work individually with each of those agencies to improve that quality, because the administration is very committed to the privacy aspects of the information that we collect and use.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Thanks very much, Senator Carper. Senator Carper, welcome.
Thanks,
It's been
Mr.
a very
Chairman.
interesting morning, and
I gather
glad
that.
you're here.
Mr. Wells, just a quick question, if you will. What was what caused you to go out and form the business enterprise that you have, and it's been so successful?
I'm sorry.
What was the spark that caused you to go out and to create a Wikipedia?
I
just remember, I've got my son's bringing from his high school. He was going to Charter High School in Delaware, Charter High School of Wilmington. And they're going to be here tomorrow with their young Democrats and young Republicans coming on the same bus from Wilmington, Delaware. You just sit on either side of the aisle.
It should be a very collaborative experience.
It promises to be that. And they have the opportunity to pick among 3 hearings to attend for, for 45 minutes or so tomorrow morning. And I know they would all love to be here. Because they talk about Wikipedia a lot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So the original inspiration for Wikipedia came about 2 years before I created Wikipedia. I was watching the growth of the open source software movement, free software, and recognized that programmers were coming together from all over the world to collaborate on creating software in a new way. And like a lot of people, when I first saw this happening, I thought, well, this is kind of fun, a hobby, but it really can't work. But very quickly we were seeing that, GNU Linux, Apache, PHP, Perl, all the software that really runs the web underneath is all collaboratively written, typically by volunteers, using a new model of sharing, using licenses that allow other people to take your work and modify it and reuse it and so forth. And so I realized that this model of collaboration was working and that it was something that could be very big in the future. It's natural that this started with programmers, because if programmers need tools to collaborate, to share their code with each other, they can create their own tools. So, for example, they have a program called CVS, which they use to check in and out changes of code so that multiple people can be working on the same project at the same time. But for the rest of us, the only way we could really collaborate was by emailing around word processing documents or whatever, which if you've ever sent out a document to 8 people and asked for revisions and you get 8 different versions back, it's a nightmare. And so I realized that what we really wanted to see was the creation of tools for people to be able to effectively collaborate. My first version of this, I had the idea that there should be a free encyclopedia. That seemed like an obvious thing. I was in a panic, actually, when I had the idea that I thought somebody else would do it first. But I designed it in collaboration with the guy that I had hired to help me. It was a very top-down approach, very old-fashioned, and it failed. It didn't really take advantage of the possibilities of the new medium. And for volunteers, a very academic top-down approach was just not very fun. So we discovered the wiki editing technology, which had been around for quite some time, and applied it to the encyclopedia, and it just began taking off almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. You may have already said this, but the lessons that you learned in that endeavor, how might we apply them effectively here?
Well, I think there's a few basic principles. One is to recognize that most people are basically good. And so it actually is possible to have a fairly open system with fairly light controls that allows the community to police themselves, and you can actually get really good quality work in that way. I always compare it to the management of a community website is very similar to good municipal government. You don't want a police state where people can be kicked out of the project for the slightest hint of dissent. At the same time, you don't want complete anarchy where people are getting mugged in the park and that sort of thing. So you've got to find that balance between openness and control that really puts the power into the hands of the community. And I think that those kinds of ideas are very applicable clearly to a democratic government in a free society. One of the things I think we should be experimenting with is agencies experimenting with doing public-facing wikis to try to get the engagement of the public in various aspects of their work.
Good. Thanks very much. Mm-hmm. Ms. Evans, it's nice to see you again. As I'm sure you recall, you were here, a couple of months ago, discussing at-risk IT investments. In your testimony today, I think you stated that eGovernment Act authorizes federal IT workforce development programs. And let me just ask a couple of questions, if I could, following up to that. How have agencies progressed since 2002 in closing and identifying IT workforce gaps?
As required by the Government Act and also the Klinger-Cohen Act, we have identified the gaps. The CIO Council takes a leadership role in that. We actually have an updated IT workforce assessment summary that we will be releasing shortly, and this is voluntarily response rate, and so we had a 40% response rate. We've identified the same gaps going forward. The agencies have plans in place to close those gaps, and that is now being monitored through the President's management agenda. We need to improve more about what we're doing and actually have better metrics to clearly demonstrate that we actually have closed the gaps, and we're working with the agencies now on that, as well as the Office of Personnel Management, so that we'll have clear metrics that we can hold ourselves accountable for in that area.
All right. And a follow-up question, if I could. And how do you plan to continue closing these IT workforce gaps in the future?
There's a couple things that we've done besides the actual plans and the hiring. The council itself has, the biggest gap is making sure that we have the workforce, that we hire the workforce, recruit them, and then bring them in and have the training program. So the CIO Council itself has worked on several recruitment tools, videos. We've also held online hiring sessions where we've used some of our special authorities so that we could then take those and work with OPM and then immediately hire the folks through online types of registration, making use of the technology so that we can attract the workers. But then the challenge that we have is we have to make sure that our workplace retains the workers. The new workforce coming in, when you start looking at the demographics, are used to certain tool sets, and we have to make sure that the government provides those tool sets so that we can retain them once they're here.
Okay. And last question, how do you measure success in this regard?
Currently, right now, the one metric is the hiring metric we have, and then we also are tracking the project managers through the framework that the CIO Council has released about the skill levels associated with that. But we need to have better metrics, and we're working on developing those metrics, especially in the area of cybersecurity, enterprise architects, and solution architects.
All right. Good. Thanks. And thanks for being here today. In fact, for all of you, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Senator Carper. Senator Kaka, if you have a question or two more, we would welcome them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Evans, every government website currently contains a list of individual parts of the site that should not be made searchable by services such as Google Search or Microsoft Live Search. When OMB implemented USA Search, it just contracted with Microsoft Search at that time, meaning that the same search restrictions for commercial services were also in this government search. The eGov Reauthorization Act calls for enhanced access to search government websites by commercial, search engines, which would evaluate and make government search engines more effective as well. USA Search was meant to be a single point to search all government websites. However, it is largely based on the same technology in use by other commercial search engines such as Google, and subject to the same limitations as have been discussed here today. When OMB set up USA Search, why didn't it ask agencies to make improvements to search, to their searchability at that time?
Well, sir, we believe, based on the policy that we did issue as required by the eGov Act, that we have asked agencies to do that, and that we provided the framework and the policy in place for them to do it. I believe the way that the reauthorization language has been written, this will give us the mechanism to follow up and make sure that there's accountability for that. It's one thing to have a policy, it's another thing to have an agency implement it, and then also report to you on an annual basis the results. And quote unquote like a scoring what they're doing. And so what we're going to do through the council and through the web communities that we have is make sure that we take advantage of things such as the sitemap standard and looking at that information and making a very conscious decision that yes, all this has to be available. And if they make a decision that maybe it should not be, then maybe it shouldn't be available to the public altogether. Maybe they need to pull that down, and there's a reason why. But the agencies have to go through this and look at it, and I think the way that we've written that you guys are doing this, our policies will accommodate for the language that's in there and hold the agencies accountable for that in a very transparent way.
Did you need this reauthorization to implement improvements?
No, sir. But I would say that, because we always are evaluating our policy, but I would say with the reauthorization, it signals to the federal agencies, and not just to the agencies, but globally, because we are looked at globally across the board about all the different types of services. We do meet quarterly with all our counterparts in several other countries. And what this will signify to them is the commitment that the government has, both the executive branch, the legislative branch, on the use of technology in a responsible way to ensure that government information is available and government services are available. We could have done it through our own administrative authorities, but this is something that I think is important to you as well as us. And so the reauthorization of that act signifies that to the global community as well.
Well,
Senator, if I may comment, this has been our experience, in fact, in communicating with dozens of federal agencies, that they understand the value of search, the importance of search, and by and large, all have complied with the eGov Act of 2002 in providing a search tool on their website, or a site search tool. But what we don't find is as much awareness or focus on web search, the step by which a citizen gets to that website to begin with. And one factor we've identified is a lack of clear guidance or a directive from OMB. And with this legislation that's been proposed, we think that will close that gap, and the agencies will understand that they need to prioritize web search and ensure that whether that user, that citizen is searching on Google, Yahoo, Microsoft Live Search, Ask.com, or on USA.gov, the example you noted, they will find the appropriate federal agency website.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Dukakis. Senator Carper?
If I could, a question, sort of for Mr. Schwartz, but also I'm going to ask our other witnesses to respond to and with their thoughts too. But to Mr. Schwartz, I'm told by my staff, I wasn't here when you did this, but I'm told by my staff, and I usually believe them, that you brought up some very good points in your testimony about privacy issues. And we all hear too often of breaches that have occurred in certain segments of our constituents are at risk, or whether it's identity theft or having some of their sensitive information, medical information, that kind of thing, publicly disclosed. And while OMB has issued a series of memorandum to address this issue, it's imperative that personal information entrusted to the government remains secure. And I would ask for you and for other three witnesses today to just share with us what you believe to be maybe the top three things that ought to be done to protect personal information.
Thank you, Senator Carper. I think this is an issue that this committee could look into in more detail, as I said earlier. I think that there are one of the main things is looking back at the Privacy Act, and well, let me first say that the committee has already taken the step of passing the e-government reauthorization act, which includes a privacy provision, which would create best practices for PIA. So it would take. I was glad to hear Ms. Evans cite that they're working on quality of the PIAs. That's the first step. Now they can look across those, see what they consider to be high-quality PIAs. These are privacy impact assessments, and create a best practice based on what the government is doing today, the agencies that are doing a good job today. So I think that's one area that this committee has already taken the step. I hope that will pass, and so that when the agencies have to cooperate with OMB, they see that it has congressional approval as well in terms of those best practices, especially moving into a new administration after next year. The second area that I would point to is looking at the Privacy Act In particular, one thing that we've pointed to are some of the definitions in the Privacy Act. I don't want to get too technical, but there is the main definition of how you figure out what is covered under the Privacy Act of 1974 is called a system of records. And the idea there is that if you, as an agency, gather records together based on whether if it's personal information or not, and you have them, and you have that information, and you actually search on those terms, then it is a system of records. If you just gather the information together and keep it in a place, but you don't go in and you search specifically on name or specifically on social security number, it may not be a system of records under the law. This is because the law was written in 1974 when we had centralized databases, and it was assumed you would always be searching on a social security number or a name, right? Not that you could search any of the fields in the database. So the law and some agencies have interpreted the law very literally, whereas some agencies have taken and taken the broader approach of saying, you know, that this was meant to apply to information that's collected in a single place. That to me is one area where, especially in the web world, where you're searching information, where we can, in the web age, where you can search information across various different resources at the same time. So it might not even be in the same central place. We need to go back and look at some of those definitions like that. Another example, just as you gave me three, is the definition of routine use, where agencies can say beforehand that they're going to use information basically and share it with other agencies. And make exceptions to very broad exceptions to how they're going to share information. As long as they do it in advance, there's this loophole that's called the routine use exemption that basically has no limits. As long as you say you're going to use it in some way in advance, you can share that information in advance. I think we need to go back and look at that in a records context and say maybe we should have some limits to what kinds of routine uses there should be.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wales?
Well, I'm not really an expert on what the federal government is doing about privacy. I just wanted to make one general point, which is that technology has impacted privacy in some sometimes surprising ways, so that information that people felt comfortable being public when it meant you could go down to the courthouse and look it up feels very different when you can type in your name in a search engine and anyone can find it just like that. An example in Florida, this is not a federal government example but a state example, all of the tax records for homes, which have been public I suppose forever, including diagrams and now satellite photos of people's houses, is all available just by searching on people's names in the local county assessor's office. A lot of people find that very unnerving, even though it's the same information that's always been available publicly, except it's a little different if you actually had to go down to the courthouse to get it. And so I think in many ways we're going to have to be not just thinking about how do we make sure the government is adhering to some privacy standards, but actually really rethinking what kinds of things people consider private or not, and maybe a philosophical approach to that question.
Good, thank you. Ms. Needham?
So the one recommendation that we would offer at Google is the same that I've been articulating this morning, which is the sitemap protocol or sitemaps technology not only enables an agency to tell search engines come and index this information, it can also say and stop indexing this information simply by withdrawing a item from that sitemap that is the message to search engines to remove that record, so that if there was a record found in a database that contained PII, the agency can swiftly remove it from search engines through this technology.
All right, thanks. Mr. Evans, the closing word?
Well, because you asked about the top three issues, and I think that what we've done, and Mr. Wells has really highlighted this, is things that we used to do traditionally and collect information, and the way we would announce it through the Federal Register and look at that need for the information. The administration has really looked at that, issued the policy about the safeguarding, but what's key to that is, why are we collecting the information? Is it really necessary for us to have that information? For example, Social Security numbers. We're actually asking agencies to really go back, look at that. Why are you collecting that information? Do you really need to have that? Or was it convenient for the programmers as a unique identifier to tie all these systems together? And couldn't we just randomly generate a unique identifier and crosswalk these? I mean, technology has evolved for some of the reasons why we were collecting certain data in order to make it easier easier. Now, because technology has now gone to the next evolution, some of those business practices we don't need to do anymore. And so we really have been focusing on the agencies, really having them go back and look at their information holdings. That is the purpose of the policy, which was MO 716. We are holding agencies accountable for it. It's a fairly comprehensive policy, and if you track the scorecard and the progress that the agencies make, last quarter we took every agency down because they did not meet all the requirements that were in there. And part of that is reviewing all the information holdings, how you use that, and then how are you protecting that.
Okay, good. My thanks to all of you. Most important, thanks for being here and for your responses.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Carper. That was a really important line of questioning. I appreciate it. I want to thank all the witnesses. This has been it's really been an excellent and, for me, exciting hearing. I'm grateful for the progress that we've made in the first 5 years under the E-Government Act. We obviously have more to do. And the reason this hearing is exciting is because of the dynamism of this part of our lives and the tremendous potential for government, but obviously in so many other ways, but in this case we're focused on government. So, we want to continue to work with you. We'll push you occasionally. I hope you'll come to us if you need help, Ms. Evans.
Yes, sir.
Our advocates for support, because we really believe in what you're doing. I must say, I talked when I was speaking about you, Mr. Wills, that you were a line that goes back in America to Franklin and Jefferson of innovators. So, but you're much younger, of course. But you all are really helping us to have that same kind of spirit of adventure and confidence and excitement as we approach the various bends in the river that human experience makes sure we will constantly approach. And so for our part, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to see that the federal government is taking maximal use of making maximal use of these technologies. I thank you very much. The record of the hearing will stay open for 15 days in case you want to add anything to your testimony and in case members of the committee, particularly those who could not, for reasons of schedule, be here this morning, want to ask you any questions in writing. But I thank you very, very much for the time you took to be here, for what you're doing every day, and for what you've contributed to our attempt to drive this exciting sense of opportunity through the federal government. The hearing is adjourned.